Pens, but not just any pens. These pens are markers. But they're not just any markers. They're Pitt artist pens. But they're not just any pens. They're Pitt artist pens that come and brush. And as in my previous experience with these things, it is more of a marker pen. So let's open these up and see what they're like. Don't worry, I will store all of this plastic wrapping in my pockets. I will not litter. Oh, very fancy. So it does come in rather a nice looking box, I must say. And the lid flips up like so. It's actually magnetic. That's nice. Comes with a little pamphlet with some example artwork, all the available colours and line widths. Whatever. But let's have a look at the pens themselves. Come out. So in the pack of 12, we get black, grey, brown, green, light green, blue, light blue, purple, pink, red, orange, yellow. And what's also very interesting is that this case for a pack of 12 actually is pretty loose. So you could put another pen in here if you wanted to, like a fine liner. And the case is some kind of very thick cardboard wrapped in vinyl. Seems pretty durable. Let's try this out. I'll get a sketchbook from somewhere. There's one. One in here. So let's try out the bright blue one. Oh yes. Very vibrant. Now let's try the light blue. Now let's see if I can capture this properly. Can you see that? See, the most common complaint I hear about these particular pens is that they don't blend. And they're not cheap either. Like in Australian dollars, they're usually over like $4 each. So why on earth would you want pens, these marker pens, that cost more than $4 each most of the time, and they don't even blend? Well, the problem is that most people compare them to something like a Copic marker. But there's one quality that these pens have that Copic markers have no chance of. So every kind of ink they put in these pens either has high light-fastness or maximum light-fastness. And light-fastness is a quality that Copics do not have. They're alcohol-based inks, just fade in sunlight. And these water-based pigment inks, which they put in these pens, really don't fade in sunlight much at all. So you could comfortably make an art piece with these pens and then hang it up on a wall in a sunny place and have the confidence that from years to come it will stay intact. The marker tips have a fair amount of flex to them, and they do more or less spring back into shape. I know they call them brush pens, but I would call them marker pens. My definition of a brush pen is that you can change the line thickness with pressure alone. And you can do that, but it does deform the tip a bit. So I like to call this more of a marker pen because you can get more line width variation by changing the angle of the pen. So let's get back home and really give these things a spin. In other news, I have found a truly enormous fungus. Look at the size of that thing. Here is my hand. It's enormous. Never seen a big fungus like that before. So massive. Printed on the cardboard sleeve that the box came in, Pigmented India Ink, high light-fastness, flexible brush nib. So. Retains its shape, waterproof, permanent, odorless, acid-free, pH neutral, does not bleed through the paper. Now I'm going to test basically all of these claims here and tell you how it goes. The only one I can't really test is the high light fastness test, because I don't have a particularly strong source of ultraviolet light. See, let's watch what happens when I just press down hard with this nib. See what it does. It does deform a bit. See, it behaves basically like a marker tip, doesn't it? Let's get this dry. So it claims it's waterproof. So here are the colours. Let's dunk them in. Let's see what happens. See how waterproof you are. No. Impressive. That, my friends, is the power of a pigment ink. That's no bleeding at all that I can see. That's excellent. Okay, well, that test is passed. Are they odourless? I can't smell anything. So they're odourless, yes, okay. Unlike alcohol markers, for example, which, you know... that is nasty. Acid-free? I don't know how to test that, actually. Would I have to, like, bleed the ink out and then see if I can react it with, like, an acid or a base to see if it's truly acid-free? Does not bleed through the paper. There is one way that I can test that. Yes, just draw something. That's what I'm going to do. So I'll be doing some line art with this Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen Fine Liner, because, you know, to keep it in the family. But for a change, I'm going to do some rough sketching beforehand, and to try and really keep it in the family, I'm going to use this Faber-Castell Polymatic. I don't think you can buy these anymore, but I have a, or you can buy Polymatics, but not this type, with this giant eraser out the back. I think they've discontinued them. Oh dear, I've broken it. Maybe that's why they discontinued them. They have a cool feature that you don't actually press the end of the mechanical pencil to get more lead. It just does it automatically each time you press down on the paper. See? Look at that. What a cool mechanism. But I digress. Let's just get... Okay, now I'll just draw something and I'll show you and tell you how these things performed. So I did stop sketching with that Faber-Castell pencil with that automatic feeding lead because, well, it just wasn't a very nice pencil to draw with, to be honest. The auto-feeding lead feature never works to my satisfaction. The plastic nib has to be constantly rubbing on the paper for it to operate. It's kind of frustrating. And I also found the shade of graphite far too dark for an initial rough sketch. So I switched to my wonderful Pentel Graph Gear 1000 and I did the initial sketch with that instead. And then I inked the thing with a 0.3mm Faber-Castell Pitt fine liner, which I showed you earlier. And I'm very happy with the performance of this fine liner. It's up there with the best, really. It's perfectly smooth, perfect ink flow. Oh yes. Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about these colourful Pitt Artist pens and what they're actually like to draw with. So the tips of these Pitt Artist pens, they're somewhat flexible. I've showed you this before. I don't know why I'm even mentioning it, to be honest. And they're very smooth across the paper. They've got excellent ink flow. And because these are like pricey pens, you may be tempted to compare them with like Copic alcohol markers, but there are massive differences between these markers and alcohol markers. The first big difference is that these markers are water-based, which is nice because they don't smell. I hate the smell of alcohol markers. I've mentioned that before again, haven't I? Oh, goodness me. And because it's water-based, you obviously can't have the same type of ink, which is an alcohol marker. So what we have in these is a Pigmented India Ink. Now, if you've never used a pigmented ink in a coloured pen before, its behaviour may surprise you. So the pigments themselves are not water soluble, they're just suspended in the water, and after the water evaporates, those suspended particles are then stuck to the paper. And because those particles aren't water soluble, adding water to it afterwards won't make it bleed, which is good and bad. It's good in the sense that any line you make once the ink is dry isn't moving anywhere. Every fine detail you put down on the paper is preserved. For example, if you do some lines of red on the paper and let it dry, you can then get the yellow pen and then scribble yellow all over it, and the yellow never bleeds into the red, and the red never bleeds into the yellow. Of course, the bad thing about this is that blending with these pens is close to impossible. It's really hard. The colours, basically, they don't mix on the paper. You can layer colours down, no problem, but trying to seamlessly merge one colour into another colour seems to be too difficult to even try to attempt. Like even trying to get a smooth, streak-free feel of a colour seems to be very difficult. You have to be really fast, as this ink dries really quickly. Yes, it's just the nature of these inks in these pens to be very additive upon themselves. Like if you get your blue pen, put some blue down on the paper, and then you put more blue down on that same part of the paper, it becomes twice as blue. But in my experience with alcohol markers, you can lay the same colour on top of itself, and it's a pretty similar intensity. And if it is a bit darker, they just merge into one another, because the previous layer you put down will dissolve into the new layer. This doesn't happen with these Pitt Artist pens. There's no dissolving, there's nothing to dissolve. It's a pigment pen. But you can use this to your advantage, because now you can get darker colours out of the same pen. You can just keep on layering it on top of itself. For example, in the green grass, I put some little cool grey pebbles, and I just shaded the pebbles with the same colour, and it got really dark underneath the pebbles. Quite impressive. Now, because streak-free colourful fills are too difficult to achieve, here's a little tip I discovered when colouring in. So when you're colouring in something, it's very important to follow the 3D form with the pen. Don't just fill it in like it's some voluminous 2D shape, scrubbing backwards and forwards, like you're trying to erase something, you know. Really try to follow the volume that the shape represents, especially for a large shape, because with large shapes, streaks seem to be really unavoidable. So try and use these streaks to your advantage, make those extra dark lines of colour, follow the 3D contours of the shape you're drawing. That way, you won't have any strange squiggly lines which are conflicting with the 3D shape you're trying to represent. Now, as to the colours in this set, it's a good selection of 12 vibrant colours, but I didn't always want colours that were this vibrant, so I used a bit of a trick with a damp watercolour brush. I held the watercolour brush and the Pitt Artist pen tip to tip, so I transferred some colour over onto the watercolour brush, and that diluted the pigments, and I could put down a lighter shade here and there. I think if you wanted to draw something a bit more realistic with these pens, you might need a lot more different shades of colours. I think I looked at a box set of 60 of these pens, and my goodness, they're like $300 Australian from Officeworks. I don't think I'll be buying them from Officeworks. Anyway, so let's go to some kind of conclusion, because this video has been long enough. So let's cut to the chase. Who are these pens for? Well, these pens are not cheap, and if you come from the world of Copic-like alcohol markers, you might find the results a little disappointing, especially if you try to use them like alcohol markers. I mean, just look at the scribble that Faber-Castell puts on the box as an example. Clearly, they're a trustworthy company, and they don't want to give false expectations, so they put that in front of the box to keep your expectations low. And then when you do achieve something amazing, oh, look what I can do. It's better than the box art. I'm pretty good. So if you're considering buying these pens, here's a question you should ask yourself. Is light-fastness in my artwork really important to me? Or is your artwork just folded in a sketchbook and only sees the light of day when someone decides to look at it? Or are you planning on drawing something in markers and then hanging it up on a wall for everyone to see for years, decades to come? If you're more the first person in this scenario, well, I wouldn't bother. The light-fastness and the high-quality pigments in these pens are basically the main selling feature as far as I can see. So if you're just planning to draw something on a piece of paper, scan it and share it on the internet or something, it's probably not worth it. Your art really only needs to last as long as it gets from your desk to your scanner, doesn't it? But even though I've said that, I still really like these pens, mostly because they feed my ego in some way. I can hold these pens and say, oh yes, I can make a piece of art with this, and in the future, it'll be hanged up in a museum, and people will marvel at it for years, decades to come. And it's going to last because I drew it with high quality pigment inks. Yeah, they're good pens. I shouldn't compare them to alcohol markers, really. It's completely different kettle of fish, apples and oranges, you know. But you would get a better looking result with a cheap set of alcohol markers. I can't deny it. It's just that the alcohol markers are not going to last. They're not going to last the test of time. Do you need your art to last the test of time? Then maybe you should scan your art and put it on the internet for digital immortality. Or do you want it to last a test of time on a piece of paper? I've talked too much. Okay, I'm going to be going now. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for making it to the end. You deserve some kind of prize, but I can't afford to give you one. Okay, goodbye. I spent too much on pens.